Stop scrolling. If you are planning a trip to the mountains, this video is the only thing standing between you and a missing persons poster. Have you ever looked at a tree and felt like it was looking back at you? Most people come to the Canadian Rockies for the fresh air and the beautiful green views. They bring their cameras and their hiking boots. They think they are entering a playground, but they are actually entering a giant silent trap. My name is Elena, and I have spent 10 years as a ranger in these mountains. I don't wear this uniform to help you find the best picnic spot. I wear it to keep you from becoming part of the landscape. There is a secret about these mountains that the government will never put on a brochure. The pines here aren't always green. Sometimes they turn gray. And when they do, the rules of our world stop working. I want you to stay with me until the very end of this video. If you do, I will share the most important rule of all. It is the secret of Rule 9. This is the one rule that saved my life when the forest finally tried to take me. If you learn it, you might survive a trip that kills everyone else. But before we get there, you need to understand the truth about what you are walking into. You need to understand that the nature you see in pictures is just a mask. Behind that mask is something very old, very hungry, and very gray. I remember my first week on the job. I was like you. I thought the wind in the trees was just air moving. I thought the silence of the woods was peaceful. I was wrong. Silence is not peace. The silence is the forest holding its breath so it can hear your heart beating. I carry a small piece of green plastic in my pocket every day. It is the exact color of a healthy pine needle. I look at it every hour. Why? Because out here your eyes can lie to you. The gray starts slowly. It starts on one branch, then one tree, then a whole valley. By the time you realize the color is gone, the forest has already locked the doors. People ask me why I stay here if it is so dangerous. They ask why a woman would choose to live in a cabin surrounded by things that want to hollow her out. The truth is, I don't have a choice anymore. The Rockies took my husband. They took my little girl, Lucy. I stay because I can still hear their voices in the wind. But I also stay to warn you. You think you are at the top of the food chain. You think you are the smartest thing in the woods. But the trees have been here for thousands of years. They have seen civilizations rise and fall. They are patient. They are waiting for you to make one mistake. They are waiting for you to ignore the color of the needles. I am going to tell you exactly what happened during the Great Gray Out. I am going to show you why the missing 411 cases are not about bears or accidents. You are about to learn the real reason why some hikers are found inside the wood of a tree that wasn't there the day before. This is not a campfire story. This is a survival guide for a world you weren't supposed to see. Listen closely. The pines are shifting, and the air is getting cold. It is time for you to learn the rules of the gray. When the pines turn gray, the first thing you will notice is not the color. It is the sound, or rather, it is the lack of it. We rangers call it the hush. In a normal forest, there is always noise. You hear squirrels jumping. You hear birds calling to each other. You hear the leaves rubbing together. But when the gray frequency starts, all of that stops. It feels like someone put a heavy blanket over the whole world. The birds are the first to know. They fly away hours before the needles change. If you are hiking and you realize you haven't heard a single bird for 10 minutes, do not stop to take a picture. Do not check your map. You need to start moving toward the nearest stream immediately. The gray is not a fungus. It is not a disease that kills the tree. It is a sign that the tree is waking up. Imagine a radio station. Most of the time, the trees are on a silent station. But when the mountain gets hungry, it turns the dial. The pines start to vibrate at a frequency that humans cannot hear, but our bodies can feel. It starts as a tiny itch in the back of your brain. You might feel a little dizzy. You might think you just need some water. But that itch is the forest trying to sync your heartbeat with the roots. The trees are trying to turn you into a part of their network. I once found a deer standing in a clearing during a gray frequency event. The deer looked perfectly healthy, but it was frozen. Its eyes were open, but it didn't blink when I walked up to it. I looked at the trees around it. The needles were turning a dusty metallic gray. I reached out my hand to scare the deer away, but I stopped. I saw that the gray color was moving from the tree roots, through the grass, and up the deer's legs. The animal wasn't stuck in mud. It was being tuned. The trees were taking its life force and replacing it with the gray frequency. If I had touched that deer, I would have been connected to the circuit too. Rule 1 is simple but very hard to follow. Trust your ears more than your eyes. Your eyes will tell you that the path is safe. Your eyes will tell you that the gray trees just look a little dry. But your ears will tell you the truth. If the forest goes silent, it means the mountain is listening to you. Every step you take sends a vibration through the ground. The gray trees use those vibrations to find you. They can feel the heat of your blood through the soil. That is why you must never run when it is quiet. If you run, your heart beats faster. A fast heartbeat is like a bright neon sign to a gray pine. It tells the forest exactly where the most energy is. You have to move like a shadow. You have to keep your breath slow and shallow. Most importantly, you must never speak. The human voice has a specific vibration that the gray frequency loves. I have seen hikers disappear because they shouted for help. They thought a person would answer them. But the only thing that answers a shout in a gray forest is the trees. They don't move fast like a person. They move slowly, inch by inch, closing the gaps between the trunks until the path you walked in on is gone. By the time the sun goes down, you aren't in a forest anymore. You are inside a ribcage made of wood. I stay in the Canadian Rockies because of a radio that doesn't work. It sits on my kitchen table in my small ranger cabin. It is old, rusted, and the batteries died years ago. But every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the speakers hiss with static. And through that static I hear them. I hear my husband Mark telling me he found a great spot for the tent. I hear my daughter Lucy laughing about a squirrel she saw near the trailhead. They have been gone for 5 years. The police say they got lost in a storm. The search teams say they probably fell into a ravine. But I know the truth. They didn't fall. The mountains invited them in, and they didn't know the rules. They didn't know that the Rockies don't just take your body, they take your memory too. When I first moved here from the city, I thought I could outsmart the woods. I was a tough detective. I thought a gun and a map were enough to keep my family safe. We went for a hike on a beautiful Saturday. The sun was warm, and the pines were a bright, healthy green. But then the air changed. It became heavy. Mark noticed it first. He said the trees looked dusty. Within minutes, the green was gone. The needles turned that deathly gray. We tried to turn back, but the trail looked different. The trees seemed to have stepped closer together. I told Mark and Lucy to stay behind me. I told them we would be fine. That was the biggest lie I ever told. We reached a clearing where the trees were so gray they looked like they were made of ash. Lucy pointed at a large pine and said, "Mommy, the tree is singing." I couldn't hear it then, but she could. Children are more sensitive to the frequency. Before I could grab her hand, she walked toward the trunk. She said she saw her favorite teddy bear sitting in the branches. I ran to catch her, but a thick mist rolled in out of nowhere. It wasn't normal fog. It smelled like old copper and wet earth. When the mist cleared 10 seconds later, the clearing was empty. No Lucy. No Mark. Just 2 sets of footprints that stopped right at the base of a massive gray pine tree. I spent 3 days screaming their names until my throat bled. I dug in the dirt with my fingernails until they broke. I even climbed that tree and tried to cut into the wood with my knife. But the wood wasn't like normal wood. It was hard like iron, and it bled a thick blue sap that smelled like ozone. That was the day I stopped being a normal person and started being a ghost that wears a ranger uniform. I realized that the forest didn't kill them to eat them, took them to store them. They are part of the network now. They are the reason the trees know my name. People think I am brave for living out here alone. I am not brave. I am a prisoner of hope. Every time the pines turn gray, I feel my heart skip a beat. I hope that this time the forest will get tired of them and let them go. I stay here to make sure no other mother has to stand in a silent clearing and realize her family has been turned into wood. I stay to tell you that the grief you feel for your lost ones is the very thing the gray pines used to catch you. They use your love like a hook. If you hear your name called from the dark woods, you have to remember, that isn't your daughter. That isn't your husband. That is the mountain using a dead radio to lure you into the gray. Rule 2 is the most important thing to remember if you are already inside the hush. Most people, when they get scared, want to lean against something. They want to put their hand on a tree trunk to catch their breath. They want to hide behind a thick pine to stay out of sight. Never touch the bark. I don't care if you are tired. I don't care if you are falling. You must treat the gray bark like it is made of red-hot lava. To the forest, the bark is not just skin for the tree. It is a tongue. The moment your warm skin touches that cold gray wood, the tuning is over. The forest doesn't have to guess where you are anymore. It has your DNA. It knows your scent, and it will never stop following it. I once saw a young hiker who had ignored this rule. He was sitting at the base of a gray pine, leaning his back against the trunk. He looked like he was just taking a nap. But when I got closer, I saw that his jacket was fused to the wood. The tree was growing tiny silver hairs that were stitching themselves into his clothes and then into his skin. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He looked at me with wide, empty eyes and whispered that the tree was telling him a story. He said the bark felt soft like a pillow. That is the trap. The gray pines release a chemical that numbs your body and makes you feel sleepy. They make you want to stay. The bark of a gray pine feels different than a normal tree. A normal pine is rough and flaky. A gray pine feels like polished stone or cold glass. If you run your hand along it, you won't get a splinter. Instead, you will feel a tiny vibration, like a phone buzzing in another room. That is the tree's pulse. Once you touch it, that pulse enters your body, starts to change the way you think. You will start to think that the forest is a safe place. You will think that the gray trees are your friends. This is how the mountain hollows you out. It replaces your thoughts with its own. I carry a heavy pair of rubber gloves in my pack. Rubber doesn't carry the frequency as well as skin does. If I have to move a branch or clear a path, I never use my bare hands. But even with gloves, I am careful. The gray bark is hungry for heat. If you stand too close to a tree for too long, you might notice the branches slowly dipping down toward you. They move so slowly that you won't see it happening. You will only notice it when you try to walk away and realize your backpack is caught on a limb that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. If you ever find yourself forced to touch a tree to keep from falling, check your skin immediately. If you see a small gray smudge that won't wash off, you are in trouble. That smudge is a seed of the frequency. It will grow under your skin like a gray bruise. It will make your limbs feel heavy and cold. There is only one way to stop it, and it isn't pretty. You have to ground yourself. You have to find a way to pull that energy out of your body before it reaches your heart. This leads us to the only thing the gray forest is afraid of. It leads us to the water. Why do I tell you to run for the water? It is not because you are thirsty. It is because water is the only thing in the Canadian Rockies that the gray pines cannot control. Think of the gray frequency like electricity. Electricity needs a path to travel. It moves through the soil. It moves through the roots. It moves through your skin. But moving water is different. A running stream or a rushing river breaks the circuit. The gray energy cannot jump across a gap of moving water. It is like a wall that the forest cannot climb over. If you can get both of your feet into a cold, flowing creek, you become invisible to the mountain. I remember a night near Bow River. I was being hunted. I couldn't see what was behind me, but I could hear the pines snapping and cracking as they shifted in the dark. The air was so thick with the gray mist that I could barely breathe. My skin was starting to tingle. I knew I was seconds away from being tuned. I didn't look for a cave. I didn't look for a tall rock. I ran straight for the freezing water of the river. I dived in, boots and all. The moment the cold water hit my skin, the buzzing in my head stopped. The silence of the hush was broken by the beautiful, messy sound of splashing waves. I stood in the middle of that river, shivering and gasping for air. I looked back at the shore. The gray pines were lined up at the very edge of the bank. Their branches were reaching out, stretching as far as they could toward the water, but they couldn't touch it. It was like they were hitting an invisible shield. The trees stood there, vibrating with anger. I could see the gray needles glowing with a faint, sick light. They stayed there all night, waiting for me to come back to the land. But as long as I stayed in that moving water, I was safe. I was a person again, not just a battery for the forest. This is why you must always plan your hike around the water map, not the trail map. Most people think they should stay high on the ridges to see the view. That is a death sentence. On a high ridge, you are surrounded by roots and rock. There is nowhere to ground yourself. If the pines turn gray on a mountain top, you have nowhere to go. You must stay in the valleys. Stay where the snow melts and turns into streams. Water is the border between our world and the gray world. It is the only place where the hive mind of the trees cannot hear your thoughts. But there is a catch. The water must be moving. A still pond or a stagnant lake is not safe. If the water doesn't move, the gray frequency can settle into it like dust. I have seen lakes in the Rockies that look like mirrors. They are beautiful, but they are traps. If you step into still water during a gray event, you won't find safety. You will find that the water is just as hungry as the trees. Always look for bubbles. Always look for a current. If the water is dancing, you can live. If the water is sleeping, keep running. Have you ever wondered why so many people disappear in the mountains and are never found? You might have heard of the missing 411 cases. These are stories about hikers who walk behind a rock and vanish forever. People think these are just accidents. They think people get lost or eaten by bears. But I have seen the files that they don't show the public. I have seen the search and erase teams. When someone goes missing in a gray zone, the government doesn't send people to save them. They send people to clean up the mess. They aren't looking for survivors. They are looking for glitches in the forest that they need to hide from the world. I remember finding a backpack once near a group of gray pines. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothes, but when I picked up the backpack, it felt heavy. I opened it and found a pair of hiking boots inside. The laces were still tied perfectly, but when I looked inside the boots, I didn't find socks. I found human bone fused directly into the leather. It was as if the person had been turned into the objects they were carrying. The trees didn't just kill the hiker. They absorbed them so fast that the clothes didn't even have time to fall to the ground. A few hours later, a black helicopter landed in a nearby clearing. Men in suits that didn't look like ranger uniforms stepped out. They didn't ask me if I was okay. They didn't ask if I had seen the missing person. They just took the backpack, marked the trees with a special blue paint, and told me to forget everything I saw. They told me that if I talked about the gray, I would lose my job and my pension. That is when I realized that the people in charge know exactly what is happening in the Rockies. They know the mountains are alive. They just don't want you to know because then nobody would pay for a park pass. These search and erase teams carry special equipment. They have sensors that can detect the gray frequency before it even happens. If they see a zone turning gray near a tourist area, they close the trails for maintenance or fire danger. It is all a lie. They are just waiting for the forest to finish its meal so they can go in and collect what is left. They don't want to rescue people because once you have been tuned by the gray, you aren't human anymore. You are a witness to a secret that is millions of years old. The biggest concern people have is that they think the government will protect them. But in the Rockies, you are on your own. The government views the gray as a natural resource, not a danger. They study it. They watch it. Sometimes I think they even feed it. If you see a trail marked with blue paint or a sign that says area closed for research, do not go near it. That isn't a research project. It is a dinner table. And if you cross that line, the only thing the search and erase team will find is your boots. Rule 4 is about the people who didn't make it to the water. If you are ever walking through a gray part of the forest and you see another person, do not run to them. You might think they are a fellow hiker who needs help. You might think you found a friend in the dark. But you need to look at their eyes first. If their eyes look like white marbles or like they are filled with milk, stay away. We call these the milk-eyed. They are the ones who stayed in the gray too long. They didn't run when the pines turned. They didn't find a stream. Now they are not really people anymore. They are like mirrors for the forest. I saw a milk-eyed woman once near the Jasper border. She was standing perfectly still in the middle of a gray thicket. She was wearing a bright yellow rain jacket, but the yellow was fading into gray just like the trees. I called out to her, thinking she was hurt. She turned her head slowly, and that is when I saw it. Her eyes had no pupils. They were just flat white circles. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me. When she spoke, her voice didn't sound like a woman. It sounded like the rubbing of dry branches. She didn't ask for help. She just repeated the last thing I had said over and over again. The milk-eyed are dangerous because they are linked. Whatever they see, the forest sees. If a milk-eyed person looks at you, the trees around you will begin to shift instantly. They act as scouts for the gray frequency. They move very slowly, almost like they are walking through deep water. They don't eat, they don't sleep, and they don't feel pain. They are just waiting to be fully absorbed. Eventually, their skin will turn into bark, and their legs will turn into roots. But until that happens, they wander the mountains, looking for more energy to bring back to the hive. The biggest mistake you can make is trying to save one of them. You might see your friend or a family member who went missing years ago. You might see them standing by a gray pine looking lost. Your heart will tell you to go to them. You will want to hug them and tell them it's okay. But you have to remember Rule 4. If their eyes are white, they are already gone. The thing standing in front of you is just a shell. The forest is using their face to trick you into coming closer to the bark. It is using your love to turn you into a mirror, too. If you encounter a milk-eyed hiker, do not speak. Do not touch them. Turn around and walk away as quietly as you can. Do not look back. If you look into those white eyes for too long, you might start to see things. You might start to see the meadow, that beautiful hallucination that makes you want to lie down and sleep forever. The milk-eyed are the ultimate trap because they look like what we miss the most. But in the Canadian Rockies, looking back is how you get caught. Always look forward and always look for the green. It was a Tuesday when I made my biggest mistake. I was tracking a sound that didn't belong in the valley. I was tired, and when you are tired, you get sloppy. I tripped over a hidden root. As I fell, I reached out to stop myself. My bare palm slammed right into the trunk of a giant gray pine. The world didn't explode. There was no big noise. There was only a cold, sharp sting, like 1,000 frozen needles entering my skin at once. I pulled my hand away quickly, but it was too late. On my palm was a perfect gray circle. It looked like a bruise, but it didn't hurt. It just felt heavy. It felt like my hand was made of lead. I sat on the ground and watched the circle started to grow. Tiny gray lines began to crawl up my wrist like spider webs. They weren't on top of my skin, they were under it. Every time one of those lines moved, I felt a pulse in my brain. I started to smell that ozone scent, the smell of the gray. I knew what was happening. I was being tuned. The forest had finally caught me. The trees around me seemed to lean in, whispering my name in that dry wooden voice. They weren't scary anymore. For a second, they looked beautiful. I wanted to lay my head down on the roots and just rest. That is the most dangerous part of the infection. Takes away your fear. It replaces your survival instinct with a strange kind of peace. I started to see images of my daughter, Lucy. I saw her playing in a meadow filled with gray flowers. She was calling me. She told me the wood was warm. She told me I didn't have to be a ranger anymore. I almost believed her. I almost let the gray lines reach my elbow. But then, I felt the small piece of green plastic in my pocket, poked against my leg. That tiny bit of real green reminded me that the vision was a lie. I stood up, but my left arm was almost useless. Felt like it belonged to someone else. I could see the veins in my arm turning a dull metallic silver. I knew I had less than an hour before the gray reached my heart. If it reached my heart, I would become one of the milk-eyed. I would stand in this forest forever, waiting for someone else to trip. I had to get to the water, but the nearest stream was 2 miles away, and the forest was changing the path. The trees were moving closer, trying to block my way with their gray branches. I began to run. Every step was a struggle because the infection made my balance go wrong. The forest was screaming now, a high-pitched vibration that made my ears bleed. The gray lines were at my shoulder. I could feel my thoughts becoming wooden. I started to forget my own name. I only remembered the name of the mountain. I was losing Elena. I was becoming the Rockies. I crashed through the bushes, my eyes fixed on the horizon, looking for any sign of a moving current. I was a ranger dying in her own woods, and the trees were laughing. I knew the water was too far. The gray lines had reached my neck, and my vision was starting to turn white at the edges. I could feel the forest pulling at my mind, trying to erase my memories of home. I had to do something drastic. This brings us to Rule 5, the iron ritual. Most people think of iron as just a metal used for tools. But in the old stories, iron is the enemy of the supernatural. In the Rockies, raw iron is like a poison to the gray frequency. It is a grounding source even more powerful than water, but it is much more painful to use. I remembered an old, abandoned mine entrance about 50 yards away. The ground there was covered in rusty iron scraps and old mining spikes. I dragged my heavy half-gray body toward the pile of metal. My heart was thumping slowly, sounding like a wooden drum. I found a long rusted iron nail. It was orange with age and sharp. I didn't hesitate. I knew that if the gray reached my chest, I was gone. I took the iron nail and pressed the cold, rusty metal directly into the gray circle on my palm. The scream that came out of my mouth didn't sound human. It was the sound of the forest being ripped out of my skin. When the iron touched the infection, it was like touching a power line. A massive shock ran through my entire body. I saw bright flashes of light. The gray lines under my skin didn't just fade. They shriveled. They turned black and smoked as the iron pulled the frequency out of my nerves and into the metal. It felt like my arm was being burned from the inside out, but I didn't let go of the nail. I pushed it deeper until I felt the bite of the rust against my bone. For a moment, the forest around me went completely dead silent. The high-pitched vibration stopped. The gray pines seemed to shiver and pull their branches back. They hated the iron. It was a short circuit in their giant network. I slumped against a rock, gasping for air. I looked down at my arm. The silver veins were gone. My skin was red and bleeding, which was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Red meant life. Red meant I was still Elena. The iron had saved my soul, but it had left a scar that would never go away. This is why I always tell new rangers to carry a piece of raw iron in their kits. Not a stainless steel knife, but real old-fashioned iron. If you are ever trapped and the water is too far, you have to be brave enough to ground yourself with metal. It will hurt more than anything you have ever felt. It will feel like your blood is boiling. But it is the only way to break the tuning once it has started. The mountain wants your heat and your spirit, but it cannot digest the cold bite of iron. The sky over the Rockies didn't turn dark like a normal night. It turned a bruised, sickly purple. I stood up from the iron pile, my hand throbbing with pain, and looked out over the valley. My heart dropped. This wasn't just a few trees anymore. The great gray out had begun. Every single pine tree as far as I could see was losing its color at the same time. It looked like a wave of ash was washing over the mountains. The sound was like 1,000 doors slamming shut at once. The mountain was no longer just hunting me. It was closing the entire valley. I knew that the small streams wouldn't be enough this time. I needed something bigger. I needed the deep glacial waters of the Great Lake. I began my descent. The trail was gone. The forest was rewriting itself as I ran. I would look at a gap between two trees, but by the time I reached it, the trunks had slid together to form a wall of gray bark. The pines were moving faster now because they were all working together. It was a giant wooden trap closing its teeth. I could feel the ground vibrating under my boots. It felt like walking on the back of a giant animal that was finally waking up. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, I would see the forest floor rising up like a wave to swallow me. As I got closer to the lake, the mist became so thick I could only see 3 feet in front of me. This was the vapor I warned you about. It smelled like a wet grave. I pulled my shirt over my nose and mouth, trying not to breathe it in. Every breath of that gray air made my head spin. I started to hear the voices again. Not just Mark and Lucy, but hundreds of voices. They were the voices of every hiker who had ever gone missing in these mountains. They were all calling out from the gray, telling me to stop running. They told me the lake was too cold. They told me the water would drown me. I ignored them. I kept my eyes on the ground, looking for the slope that led to the shore. Suddenly, the trees opened up, but they didn't lead to the water. I was standing on the edge of a high cliff, 50 feet above the lake. Behind me, the gray pines were pushing forward, their branches clicking together like bones. They had me cornered. The trees at the edge of the cliff were leaning over, their roots lifting out of the dirt to wrap around my ankles. There was no path down. There was only a long drop into the dark, freezing blue below. I looked down at the water. It was moving, tossed by a cold wind. It was safe, but the fall was dangerous. I looked back at the forest. The trees were no longer trying to hide what they were. I saw faces in the bark, stretched, wooden faces of people who had been taken years ago. They were reaching for me. I had to choose. Stay on the land and become a statue of wood, or jump into the unknown and hope the water would catch me. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, closed my eyes and stepped off the edge. The water didn't feel like a liquid when I hit it. It felt like a wall of ice. The shock of the cold nearly knocked the air out of my lungs, and for a few seconds, I sank down into the darkness of the lake. Everything was silent underwater. The high-pitched buzzing of the trees was gone. The screaming voices were muffled. But as I opened my eyes and looked toward the bottom of the lake, I saw the truth. I saw the secret that the government and the search and erase teams spend millions of dollars to hide. The roots of the gray pines did not stop at the dirt. I could see them through the clear glacial water. They grew down the underwater cliffs and spread across the floor of the lake like giant, glowing nerves. They weren't brown or wooden anymore. Underwater, they were a bright, pulsing silver. I realized then that the trees were not separate things. Every pine in the Canadian Rockies was connected to the same heart. The mountains weren't a range of rocks. They were one single living organism that was as big as a province. As I floated there, I saw things caught in the roots deep below. I saw old cars from the 1950s. I saw small airplanes that had crashed decades ago. They were all wrapped in those silver nerves, being slowly pulled into the floor of the lake. The forest was like a giant collector, gathering anything that stepped onto its skin. It wasn't just taking people, it was taking our history. It was building a library for us made of wood and bone. The roots underwater looked like they were breathing, moving back and forth with the current of the lake. I swam toward the surface, but I felt a pull. One of the silver roots had reached out from the silt. It didn't grab me like a hand. It just brushed against my boot, and I felt a wave of images flash through my mind. I saw the mountains before there were any people. I saw a world that was all gray and green. The forest wasn't evil. It was just hungry, felt lonely. It wanted to pull everything into itself so it would never be alone again. For a second, I felt sorry for the mountain. But then I remembered the white eyes of the milk-eyed, and I kicked my legs as hard as I could. I broke the surface of the water, gasping for air. The shore was still lined with gray trees, but they were standing still now. They couldn't reach me here. I looked back down into the dark water one last time. I knew that the gray was more than just a frequency or a color. It was a giant sleeping mind. We are just ants walking on the skin of a god that is starting to wake up. I swam toward a small rocky island in the middle of the lake. I knew I had to wait there until the sun came up and the hush ended. When the sun finally rose over the peaks, the gray was gone. The pines were green again, looking like innocent trees in a beautiful park. I sat on my small rocky island, shivering and wet, watching the search and erase helicopters circle the valley. They were looking for what was left. I knew I had to get back to my cabin, but I was different now. I had seen the silver nerves. I had felt the mind of the mountain. And now I have to give you the final piece of the puzzle. I promised you the secret of Rule 9, and here it is. The forest is not outside of you anymore. Rule 9 is the one they never tell the tourists. If you have seen the gray pines have seen you. You think that by leaving the park and going back to your city, you are safe. You think that because you are surrounded by concrete and lights, the mountain can't find you. You are wrong. The frequency doesn't stay in the woods. It follows you home in your memories. Every time you close your eyes and picture those gray trees, you are strengthening the link. Rule 9 says, never look at a pine tree and think it is your friend. Even the one in your backyard is listening. Even the one on your Christmas card is a doorway. I am telling you this because I want you to be afraid. Being afraid is the only thing that keeps your heart beating fast enough to resist the hush. If you go to the Rockies, go ahead and take your pictures. Buy your souvenirs. But keep your running shoes near the water. If you see the needles lose their color, do not be a hero. Do not try to save your friends. Do not try to film it for your channel. Run. Run until your lungs burn and you feel the splash of a moving river. Most people who watch this will think I am crazy. They will say I am just a woman who spent too much time alone in the woods. They will go to the mountains next weekend and they will laugh at my rules. Those are the people the forest wants. The mountain loves the arrogant. It loves the people who think they are in control. But you? You have listened to the end. You have the truth now. That truth is a heavy burden. but it is also your only shield. The Canadian Rockies are a masterpiece of horror painted in green and gray. I am still here, sitting in my cabin, listening to my dead radio and waiting for the next hush. I know that one day the iron won't be enough. One day the water won't be enough. But until that day comes, I will keep telling the story. Stay alert. Watch the colors. And remember, if the pines turn gray, the mountains are no longer your playground. They are your grave.